Hello, Vroomers!
I'm Nick.
I'm Jack. And today, we have a lot to talk about because we're talking about Imola. And in Imola, there were 3 major events that we're going to cover for you here today. A qualifying, a sprint race, and a race.
I'm
Isn't
surprised
that exciting?
You've already made it this far without saying something about how G's move in silence.
Real G's move in silence like lasagna.
And Emilia, Romagna.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know where you were going with that. Yeah.
Come on.
That's good. You want to... missed opportunity there.
I'm not starting over. We got to keep going.
The Vroomers do not like it when we start over. I think we have to keep it authentic and real, and we just missed that one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my name is Jack.
My name is Nick.
And this is the Vroom Podcast. Let's start with qualifying, shall we?
I'd love to.
So it's really hard to remember way back on Friday when there was qualifying. But a few things happened. It was raining off and on, and that caused the most red flags ever in a qualifying session.
There's a lot to be said about qualifying, but you could also sum it into one sentence, which is that it sucked.
Yes, it was really long. It was so long because there were 5 red flags.
That was terrible.
Before we get to general thoughts, there are a couple of things that I wanted to call out that I thought were interesting. The one from Q1, do you remember Albon's brakes exploding on the track violently?
I can't say I know why that happened. Do you know why that happened? I remember seeing the explosion. It was very odd.
Yeah, I don't know why it happened. They caught fire, which does happen sometimes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was a pretty dramatic explosion, and I thought that it was interesting that they weren't more concerned about going near the car when he went into the pits. Because if there was somebody standing back there when that explosion happened at first, I think he would get pretty hurt. That was a pretty big blast. And then he just pulls into the pits, and they just like the Jackman goes right in there, and they seem like it's not.
It is actually crazy how ballsy a lot of these like marshals and the pit crew are. The car could be on total fire, and they'll get within like 2 feet of it.
Yeah, you don't. I think it's maybe it doesn't occur to me as often as maybe it should that there's a lot of stuff that's under pressure in those cars, and I think that they do a good job of containing it, but like if something goes wrong, it could just explode.
For sure.
And we saw that, last year or 2 years ago, with the Roman Grosjean crash, and like the fuel's not supposed to escape like that, but sometimes it does.
Yeah. When you slide your car through a barrier, it'll find a way to explode.
Yeah. That was about all I thought about Q1. I don't know anything.
Q1 was actually kind of interesting, though, wasn't it? It was definitely the best part of qualifying. We'll talk later about the rain, but Alex Albon sets on fire. I'm pretty sure I remember telling you Guan Yu Zhou had like definitely his best qualifying round so far. He was top 10.
Yeah.
McLaren's looked okay. Mercedes didn't.
Mercedes almost didn't make it to Q2, but they both did.
Yeah. And at this point, it was still wet, right? It wasn't raining, but it wasn't dry.
Correct. I believe that they were on slick tires, but it was wet.
Yeah.
So Q2, Carlos Sainz has just been. It's hard to tell how much of it is bad luck and how much is brought upon himself, but he loses the car and goes into the wall, which causes a red flag. And it looks like from the replays that he just overdid it a little bit. This one looks like it was pretty much his fault.
Yeah, I agree. He stops the session, right? It's a red flag.
Yep. And he's out. I think they have to come take his car. So that takes some time, and he can't actually come back into qualifying. So that's his qualifying. He ends in
7th, I believe. No,
you know what?
Q2.
He actually. This is interesting. I think he actually made it into Q3 on a previous lap.
Yeah.
But then is unable to race in Q3. So he qualifies in 10th place, but without posting a time for Q3.
Right.
I think is what happened.
Right. That makes sense.
And then the other thing, neither Mercedes make it into Q3. Which is crazy.
And I think they mentioned that was the first time since the hybrid era began that both Mercedes have not reached Q3.
Wow.
How the mighty have fallen.
Yeah, it's bad. And George Russell looked like he was a few tenths up on Hamilton basically the entire time, and he does out-qualify Hamilton.
Yeah.
George is in 11th, and Hamilton's in 13th.
Yeah. On top of Lewis just not looking good, I think it's kind of a skill set of George's to drive better in the wet, is it not?
Yes. Although I think that's probably also a skill set of Lewis's.
Yeah, they grow up in the same place. You would think it'd be similar.
Yeah. But George is a very quick driver, which we'll get to later. And I'm fascinated by that dynamic between the two of them. Lewis has not really had another driver that's been able to compete with him for a long time since Nico Rosberg. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And there's a little cut in the broadcast of Toto yelling at Lewis in the garage.
Yes. Spicy. Things got spicy.
Yeah.
No Austrians could get that spicy. It followed by that very uncomfortable interview. I don't think you heard it, right? We were chatting about that.
Yeah, what? Remind me?
So they interview Lewis after Q2 and him not having made it, and Lewis is highly unspecific in what went wrong, but his take was just the team made some bad decisions. And it was just so uncomfortable. Like he didn't want to tell the truth of what was bothering him quite clearly, but he was also quite clearly very upset about something. And I was chatting with you about this. What were the bad decisions? It was wet. They ran the right tires for the wet. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's hard to know if he's talking about like maybe bad setup decisions. They really didn't have a good shot at setting up this car. They enter into Parc Ferme super early because the qualifying's so much earlier. But yeah, that's interesting. Lewis is usually pretty open about when he disagrees with the setup. I think that happened earlier this year when he qualified so terribly at whatever that was, Jeddah or something. And he was pretty clear that he thought that was a setup thing.
Yeah. Odd. The Mercedes story is just so odd this year.
It's fascinating, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a couple more red flags and a yellow flag that I don't even want to talk about, but it just took forever. And eventually we end up with Max Verstappen on pole. But it's an interesting pole lap because he actually had to back off quite a bit because he drove through a yellow flag zone and very clearly backed off. He didn't really cheat it. You can hear him lift off quite a bit. But that ends up being his pole sitting lap.
So weird. Such a weird weekend. Do you know about the cat? You know about the Imola cat?
I know that there is one, but I don't really know that much else about it.
So it's like there's this cat that lives on the track, and it's like famous. I think it has its own Twitter and own Instagram and whatnot. It's kind of hilarious. But everybody says it's like good luck. I'm starting to think it's not good luck. This weekend was the opposite of good luck. That's a good summation of the weekend in general. It's just sort of bad luck for a lot of people, which we will get to. After watching qualifying, one thing I'm curious what you think about. I was wondering if these cars are a little bit harder to handle in the wet than in previous years, because it seemed like
the drivers kept going off in the same spots to the point where the announcers were talking about it. Like, how do they not realize that they can't drive in that one instance, they can't drive on the paint because it's causing them to spin.
Yeah.
But they just kept going off. There were, like the most red flags ever.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I'm forgetting. Lando Norris doesn't only go off to cause a yellow flag. Lando Norris goes off on his outlap in this exact manner that you're talking about. He hits the paint that everyone had been touching and everyone knew not to touch, and he does it on his outlap and causes a flag.
Yeah, and that's just crazy to me because he was driving well. He ends up qualifying in third, and he's not a bad driver. Like, it's not like he was a paid driver that is like, oh, there he goes again crashing. He's like one of the better drivers on the grid. It's crazy. It feels like they're. I don't know. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I wonder if there's other stuff going on, but it's just surprising.
Yeah, but I would guess it has something to do with the porpoising, maybe. You'd lose grip when the car shoots up towards the sky, and a wet track definitely doesn't help keep you attached to the ground.
Yeah. I would be interested in somebody with like more experience than me to analyze it. Because naively, I'm thinking like in the wet, you tend to, at least in a road car, what you're worried about is like aquaplaning, right? Where you start to, there's like a layer of water in between the tire and the road. Mm-hmm. But I feel like if you're porpoising, you're also coming down with a lot more force when you're bouncing. So I would think that would have more force to like push away the water, and it would be harder to actually float on top of the water and slide. But I'm sure that there's something wrong with that argument. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I went as far as physics too. I don't we didn't really talk about race cars, or I could tell you about concave and convex lenses.
Oh yeah, I always liked those.
We'll save that for next week's pod.
Stay tuned for our new pod. Nick and Jack learn science together, starting from the basics. Okay, so that's qualifying. I think that we should move on to the sprint race since we have so much going on this weekend. So on Saturday, there was a sprint race.
And I know personally a couple of my friends did not watch the sprint race, which is understandable. They don't have enough time or whatever. But it is important beyond the fact that it is a point scoring race, in that it's essentially the legitimate qualifying, because it places you on the grid in your position that you will start the race on Sunday. So if you watched qualifying but not the sprint race, that was probably the opposite decision to make if you were only going to watch two things this weekend, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so last year was the first year that they did these, and one thing that I didn't like about it last year was they called the winner of the sprint race the winner of pole. And it ended up with, I thought, some weird statistical outcomes. Like there was a battle, George Russell and Latifi, to see if George could out-qualify Latifi in every race. Mm-hmm. And the announcers kept tripping over it because one of the sprint races, George beat Latifi in qualifying, but then Latifi beat him in the sprint race.
Yeah.
And so I felt like those stats for qualifying should be for qualifying and not the sprint race. And so you should still count it as George beating Latifi in qualifying.
It's not a fair comparison, because a sprint race versus a hot lap is a very different skill set.
Totally. And there are definitely drivers where their strength is the hot lap versus the racing. And like I think that should be reflected in the stats.
Yeah.
So this year, they changed the nomenclature around this a little bit without changing how it works in the sense that the sprint race still determines the order. But they're now calling the winner of qualifying on Friday the pole sitter. That's the person who won pole.
Interesting.
Even if they don't start the race at the front.
Pole.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So, I don't know. It's a little weird. I think that makes sense, but it's also
that might be
weird.
The best answer, even though it's odd.
Yeah, that's so that's some good context. How much do you remember the start of the sprint race, since it was So long ago now.
Oh, Max was like, the gears aren't synced. This is crap.
Yeah, Max
That's all I remember.
Very bad start. So Max started on the pole of the sprint race, had a bad start, was passed by Charles Leclerc pretty quickly, and complained about those gear sync issues. Then they raced around for a while.
But not too long, because it's just a sprint race.
Yep. I think there were like maybe 21 laps. They're not required to pit, so it's basically just start to finish. See who gets to the end fastest.
What were the tires like? Everybody ran softs, right?
Yes.
Besides, I think like one person was on mediums.
Yeah.
But I don't think that winds up being important.
I want to say
it's like K-Mag or something.
K-Mag and Mick Schumacher.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that they were on the mediums, but everyone else was on the softs. And that becomes important. Leclerc keeps the lead for a while, and then eventually Max catches up and passes him with a couple laps to go.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit. I think it was kind of a combination of strategy, luck, tire wear for Charles, as well as just a concentrated effort by Max to hold off and not do that song and dance that they've been doing where they pass each other and then they pass each other and then they pass each other. It seemed like Max waited late into the race, dumped the battery, get around Charles, and at the same time Charles's tires were wearing much more than Max's were. So he made the effort stick, wound up with the win.
Yeah, I agree. It was a cool move too.
Yeah, it was very cool, very clean.
I like when they set it up like that. I was enjoying Jeddah at the end for the same reason, because the broadcast was just following those two, and then you could see him get closer, and he set it up, and I thought that was cool.
The tactics this year seem so much more, like, I don't know, premeditated maybe, or it seems more like a chess game than it does a classic race that we're used to.
Yeah, I think in previous years, the way to pass was to just throw it into the corner and just hope you had enough brakes, which Max is really good at.
Yeah.
But this year that doesn't work because you can just follow so closely again that if you manage to do that, the person behind you is just going to overtake you right back.
For sure.
Which I like that. I think it's a more fun race to watch. It's fun to watch them race really close for a number of laps, I think, rather than take these huge lunges and then kind of pull away, and that's that.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything else jump out at you from the sprint race besides the start and the finish?
Just Carlos is moving up. We probably expected it because he's in the Ferrari. He's got pace, but he moved up very well. Where did he get to?
10th to 4th.
10th to 4th. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
In 20 laps. That's wild.
Yeah, he did a great job. He's a good driver.
We kept seeing that same move over and over again. Get to DRS, shoots DRS down the straight, and then clips off a person or two.
Yes, because this is an old track, there's only one DRS section, and then it goes into a chicane. And we saw that in the race as well. That was where almost all of the overtaking happened.
Yeah. Which is not what we saw in the race, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes. So real quick, the lineup that is going to start the race and also the finishing order of the sprint race, Max Verstappen ends up winning and getting... So he had pole, and then he starts on first in the race, which is not called pole anymore. We need another word for that, I suppose. Leclerc in second, Checo in third, Sainz in fourth, Lando Norris in fifth, with Daniel Ricciardo in sixth. So very good from the McLarens. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, huge turnaround from them so far this season. It's incredible.
Yeah. Bottas in seventh, Magnussen in eighth, Alonso in ninth, Mick Schumacher in 10th. Very good finish for Mick Schumacher. I think that's the highest on the grid that he started in his career as an F1 driver.
I think you're right about that. So Jack and I had the pleasure of watching the sprint race together.
Yes.
Do you remember the quote I said that you said you wouldn't put in notes?
That I wouldn't? I don't remember it, no.
So there's only one country with two individuals representing the top 10 from the sprint race, and that is Spain with Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true. I wasn't a huge fan of the fun fact, but it's true. That's a true fact.
But it winds up being relevant in the race.
Oh. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. So we can get to it real quick. George Russell in 11th, Yuki Sonoda in 12th, Sebastian Vettel in 13th. Not so bad for him after some really bad races and non-races.
Yeah, definitely.
Lewis in 14th, so he actually drops a position, I believe, from where he qualified, which is very disappointing, I'm sure. Lance Stroll in 15th, Ocon in 16th, Gasly 17th, Albon 18th, Latifi 19th, and Guan Yu Zhou crashed in the beginning of the sprint, which we didn't really mention, but he did, and he did not finish the race, so he's in last.
He crashed, lap 1 or lap 2? It was very early.
Yeah, I think it was lap 1.
Yeah, rookie mistake if I remember correctly, just racing too tight where he didn't have to.
Yeah. Another notable thing, both Haas's finished in front of both of the Mercedes, as did Valtteri Bottas.
Gunther Steiner is the alpha Austrian. Apparently.
He's Austrian or is he German?
I'm pretty sure both him and Toto are Austrian. I think that's
wow.
the weird little thing they share with each other.
Neat. Mm-hmm. So the race.
The racy race.
We had that today, so maybe we remember it a little bit better after all of these things. It just seems like there's a lot that happened this weekend with all these different events.
Yeah.
So this one, also some rain, but luckily, I guess it wasn't raining during the race. So it rained earlier in the day, and it cleared up to the point where everyone could start on inters. Mm-hmm. Certain parts of the track were dry. There was kind of a dry line. Oftentimes, there are other races going on the track that make the racing line dry. Mm-hmm. But the radar looked like there was some more rain coming in 20, 25 minutes. So, the teams, I'm sure, were watching that very closely, and it promised to be kind of an interesting decision whether or not to move to slicks or if it was going to rain again, what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Another thing to note is if you run inters, which are the intermediate tires that work in the wet, but not quite as wet as you would use wet tires for, if you run those on dry track too much, it shreds them because they're not made for that. And then they don't work as well in the wet. So you have this weird, you could potentially be in a situation where you have to switch to slicks and then quickly switch back to inters when it actually rains.
Yeah. I think this is the first time we actually see wet tires used and they wind up being the appropriate tire. I feel like so often we see inters when we should see wets and people start complaining, and so often we see people getting on slicks when they should be on inters and people crash and don't finish. But it seemed like the inter was the solid choice for this.
Yeah, I agree. You have to feel for those teams making those decisions because it's such a high-risk decision.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to get right, as we saw many times last year, most notably Sochi, with Lando Norris losing out on his first victory.
That race just came undone in the last 10 laps, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
It's tragic to watch.
Yeah. One other thing to mention about Imola, since it's an old track, the pit lane is longer than normal, and I actually think there's a curve in it.
Yeah.
And so the pit stops in this track take longer than the normal pit stop in the normal track. So now this decision about the tires is even more scary because you're going to lose even more time to the field when you go into pit.
Gotcha. Didn't realize that.
So before the race even started during the formation lap, I was thinking about the race last year when after the red flag, the entire field that was on inters went into the pits for slicks except Lewis Hamilton, and then he started the race by himself because they were driving around commenting about how dry the track was.
Yeah.
But in this case, they all stay on the inters and they all start together.
Lewis and his tires.
Yeah.
Tale as old as time. Sorry, I'm an idiot. Let's talk about the race.
You want to take the start?
Starts fairly clean, right? Max gets away. He doesn't complain about the gear sinking. Charles didn't get away great. Checo gets around him. Obviously, we're going to see Carlos try to push, makes up some space, get to the front.
Yes. Although it wasn't clean for very long.
Yeah.
Because right in the first chicane after the straight, Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz come together, and Carlos Sainz gets beached.
Yeah.
Which ends his race.
That was so upsetting. I feel that goes back to what you're saying. Like, is it him not driving super great, or is it just luck? It's hard to tell. I don't think this was his fault. I also don't really think it was Danny's fault. Maybe a little bit overzealous driving on Danny's part. It looked like he had a little bit of understeer or lack of grip in the wet that caused them to come together. But yeah, Carlos ends up being the one who gets screwed when it's almost clear that it's Carlos's fault, or Danny's fault. It leans that way.
Yeah, it's tough. I think Carlos is in a faster car than almost everyone around him. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like he didn't get over as much as he could have. And part of me thinks, like, yeah, I don't think it was actually, like, legitimately his fault.
Yeah.
But you got to play the numbers, and you can't be putting yourself in that kind of a position if you have space to move over. Because even if Ricciardo gets around him, Sainz is in a way faster car. He's going to pass Ricciardo back no problem.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Then he's still racing.
Yeah.
Because we know from playing the video game, those starts, it's really hard to avoid all of those other cars, right? Like, you got to be very careful.
It's terrible.
And I always thought, like, last year, especially in the campaign phase of the season, Lewis was really good at keeping his nose out of trouble. Mm-hmm. And he knew when he needed to back out to save the car. And he's that's why he won all those championships, because he knows how to play that long game.
Yeah, I think he just trusts the car enough later in the race to make the moves he needs to get to a good position.
Yeah. And in this case, Sainz really paid the price.
Yeah.
Another DNF, beaching his car like last race, too.
Wild.
Yeah. And then Ricciardo's actually able to get out of the sand. So even though he crashed into Sainz, he still races on.
See the route he took? He, like, drives through the grass onto, like, what looked like a cart path from a golf course.
Yeah, I actually think that's why that's there.
Yeah.
So because the cars can't drive on the sand, so they need something, and they give them that little, like, 1 car width of road right next to the wall in case they get through the sand that they can drive out.
Mm-hmm. I guess the luck thing I mentioned earlier with the cat is that of all cars to get beached on the first lap, it's a Ferrari, and they're racing in Italy.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Regardless of Carlos's personal luck, that's bad Ferrari luck.
Yeah, the Tifosi were very upset about that, I'm sure.
Yeah. That was just the first thing that happened.
Also in the start, somehow George Russell makes it up to P6. I wasn't actually sure how he did that.
I couldn't tell you either, but I think it was he and Alonso. Alonso makes up some good ground as well. Or maybe it was Vettel. It was Vettel, actually. It was Vettel. But they moved up a lot really quickly. Yeah,
you're right. I think Vettel went up. I don't have written down exactly how high, but he went up quite a bit. George Russell was in 11th, and he moved up to 6th.
Dude.
It's a lot.
It's wild.
Unfortunately, Lewis Hamilton does not. And stays down where he was.
I'll just say it now. Have you noticed, like, what Nico Rosberg's, Nico's job is? Like,
just talking about Mercedes.
He's the Lewis Hamilton, like, what's the word? He just talks about everything bad that happens to Lewis Hamilton. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it is. He's right to, like, the commentators were not commenting on how high George Russell was compared to Lewis Hamilton. I was kind of glad that Nico brought it up because it's a pretty surprising gap that, spoiler, stays that large or even gets larger as the race goes on. George Russell was way ahead of Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So now we've talked about this a couple of times, but I think that's fascinating that he's just taking it to Lewis in this way.
And Nico is ready to tell us about it.
Yeah. I don't think Nico and Lewis are best friends anymore, so he's happy to bring that up.
Yep.
So, so you mentioned the other Spanish driver, and Fernando Alonso, we see after a few laps, picks up some damage on his side pod. And I didn't catch this on the broadcast, but it looks like when we look at a replay that the little kerfuffle in the beginning, Mick Schumacher spins and his rear wheel hits Alonso's side pod.
Yeah.
And it takes out a pretty sizable chunk of it, enough of it that they have to retire the car.
Yeah. And eventually, it was weird how it happened, though, because the damage was on lap 1, right? They come together through that little corner, somewhere around that corner. But we don't see the side pod go until lap 6, and it kind of just shoots out like a parachute.
Yeah, it's funny how that, you're right, it's sort of funny. But it is also a little, I mean, I guess it's very random when you crash, but it's like sort of a weird spot to only have damage, because like you would think you would hit a car with the whole side of your car, or the wheels would take some of it. But in this case, Schumacher's car just spun in just such a way that the wheel right into the side pod. So he's out. Sainz is out. We lose our 2 Spanish drivers.
Wah, wah, wah.
But then the field kind of stabilizes a bit.
Yeah.
There's no DRS because it's wet. And the drivers start to do kind of an interesting dance where they don't want to rip those inters apart, like I mentioned earlier. So they start to go in the wet parts of the track when they reach the straightaways, which is kind of interesting to see. But I think that at this point they still thought that it was going to rain again sometime soon, so they're not quite wanting to switch to slicks, because that's a huge pit stop like we mentioned. But it's like kind of a weird, the announcers are talking about it, and there's not a lot of overtaking, but I think everyone's sort of pensive, waiting. Is it going to rain? Is someone going to try the slicks?
And you can tell they're hesitant. They're kind of waiting for the slicks, or they're waiting for the rain to really do something, because it was kind of, there wasn't a lot of movement for a while.
Yeah, there wasn't at all.
Yeah.
The only one that I remember was around lap 12. George Russell and Kevin Magnussen have a kind of cool duel. And at one point, George Russell tries to pass Magnussen through that chicane and overdoes it. And then Magnussen kind of comes back at him, which I thought was cool. And, you can tell they're able to follow each other pretty close, which, again, is just another, the new regs have let cars do that. But then eventually George Russell does make it by.
But this is where he does do it is interesting, in that in the sprint race, we saw everybody make their move on the exact same place, like I mentioned earlier, hitting DRS down the straight, making their move over there. This was not there at all. It was in the middle of the track, essentially.
Yeah, you're right. I think almost all of the moves were in that chicane, Tempranillo chicane or something. It's like turn 1, turn 2.
Where some cars just had some more grip.
Yeah. I think it caught Kevin Magnussen out a little bit. I don't think he was expecting George to go for it right there.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that was like basically all the movement for a while.
Yeah.
Until finally, on lap 18, Daniel Ricciardo, who's already in last because he crashed earlier in the race, comes in for the medium tires. And now the whole grid gets to have a look at how well these medium tires do. And so the announcers mentioned for the first 2 sectors, he was purple and green. Yeah. And then immediately the whole pack goes in like the very next lap.
Yeah, when's the last time you saw Daniel Ricciardo set the fastest lap of the race?
Did he get it in?
He did for a hot second. Oh, in Monza.
Oh, you're right. He got it in this one. When he won in Monza, do you know if he got it then? Or...
I don't. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I would feel like no.
Yeah, the only reason why he might have is that it's harder to go faster than him if he's in the lead.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless there's like a big gap or something. But because Max and Lewis crashed out that race.
Yep.
But yeah, everyone kind of comes in.
Yeah, the field starts trickling in.
I thought that there was a pretty decent strategy call on the Red Bull side to bring in Checo before Max, because usually they would give the leader priority, but Max had pulled out to like an 8-second lead on Checo, and they bring in Checo before Charles Leclerc, who is in third at this point. And that gives Checo enough time to warm up his tires so that when Leclerc does pit, even though Leclerc actually does come out in front of Checo is able to pass him and keep that position.
We see is that the overcut? The overcut works, or is that the undercut?
That's an undercut.
Okay, so we see the undercut work, but because of tire temperature, Checo just goes right back around him.
It would be, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it was
what Leclerc did would have been an overcut if it had worked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's something that we've started to see this year, maybe because of the tire blankets or something else, where it's not, in the past years, the track position that you came out of the track on from the pits was normally, that was it. But this year, it seems to be that it takes a full lap to warm up the tires, and we see that.
Lots of complaining about that this weekend as well. I think because the track is wet, it's more difficult to heat up. There was a lot of complaints about the track being cold.
That makes sense. It's interesting. I think it's kind of fun to have the cars on the track, like very different speeds.
Yeah.
That they can go. Like, it's fun to have to watch them pass each other instead of just...
it's kind of humorous. Like, Checo really blew right past Charles. But Charles is obviously very fast.
Yeah, you could tell, Checo was, like, way faster in that one moment. The other thing, there is contact, slight contact. It's actually kind of hard to tell if they literally touch, but Lewis Hamilton comes out of the pits, and then as he's driving down, Ocon comes out like basically right into him and is able to take the position, but they're sort of next to each other and maybe run into each other in the pits. Just some more bad luck for Lewis Hamilton.
Does the grid just not respect Lewis at all? I mean, not even like the average amount of respect they give each other? Because the way Esteban pops out into the pit straight, or what would that term be? After he's done
pit lane?
Literally, pit lane. He really puts himself right in front of Lewis.
Yeah. I agree. I don't know.
Crazy.
I think it's a little bit on the team because Ocon has no idea where the other cars are. It's just the team's job to let them out at the right time.
That. Yeah.
But I think once he was out, I'm sure he saw Lewis, and he still, disrespected him and just took that place.
Yeah. And we also see George's issue. Well, the commentators announce it at least, and I think there's a little bit of radio chat about how the pit crew wasn't able to adjust his flaps. Do you know what that means?
So what I think that is when you're on the wet tires, the inters, I imagine that they have the flaps set differently. Like, you give them a different amount of front wing than when you have slicks. So, like, I think it's on the front wing, they can adjust how upright or flat the front wing is to give you more or less downforce.
Yeah.
And I think that they meant to give him more front wing when he got the slicks, but they didn't. And so on the broadcast, they mentioned that's going to make him understeer more, which makes sense because it's not giving the front tires as much grip, which is how you get understeer.
Not a track you really want understeer on. Understeer you'd prefer on a track with more straights at higher speeds. This is a tighter track for sure. Yeah,
that's interesting. I've never really thought about where you would prefer one or the other, but that makes sense. I would imagine you would want a pretty pointy car through a slower track like this.
Yeah.
So he has to race the rest of the race like that. Let's see.
Yeah, where do we go from there? I think we kind of enter a dead zone, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
A dead zone of Lewis trying to get around Pierre Gasly for what feels like eternity.
Yeah, I was a little. I think there was just nothing else to show.
Yeah.
But I was really tired of watching that same move. Lewis like sort of tried to go for that same move lap after lap, and it was for like 13th place or something.
Yes.
And he never got it done.
And I was sitting there saying, turn DRS on, or at least that's what's holding Lewis back. I didn't really care about the fact that the marshal had decided to not turn the DSR on. Or DR, have I been saying DSR this whole time? DRS.
No, just that one time.
Okay. But yeah, so DRS wasn't enabled based on the race marshal's decision, probably just to keep things safe, especially because all the moisture on the track, there was still a lot of moisture on the track. It was just outside of the racing line. So if you see someone try to go around someone, they're going to leave the racing line. And if they've got DRS and they're going faster, we're going to see some accidents. So that's probably why it hadn't been enabled up until mid-race, essentially. But yeah, we keep seeing Lewis try to get speed, try to go around Pierre, and he's got nothing. So I'm like, okay, put DRS on. Maybe that'll give him a shot. But apparently, no.
Yeah. At one point, this is a little bit later, lap 46, after many laps of watching this, Crofty says, 13th place is there for the taking if Lewis Hamilton can get past Pierre Gasly. And I just thought that was hilarious. 13th place is only 3 places away from scoring a point.
Yikes. Big yikes.
Yeah, it was bad. But eventually, like, a lot of laps go by. Like, a lot of this race goes by, and there is just nothing happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was a total processional for a while.
Yeah.
At one point, while nothing was happening, did you catch when they showed this like weird ring, like metal piece come off of Latifi's car and land itself right in the racing line?
Latifi, who's cruising back there all alone.
He didn't crash, though.
He didn't crash. He just shot metal shards onto the track for no reason.
I was pretty impressed that they caught that. I was wondering how they knew about that at the broadcast.
Do you think the cameramen have a radio? Because I imagine the only person who saw that happen would have been a cameraman.
That's probably, that's a good point. That's probably exactly what happened. Because they did catch it on camera. Yeah. So that cameraman was probably like, hey, I got something interesting over here. You should check this out.
It's 10 seconds of fame.
And they're like, thank the Lord that there's something that we can show.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. But then excitement did start.
Yeah, eventually. So this was lap 20 was about when they came in for their mediums. That was when the leaders came in.
Yeah, which could have made it to the end of the race. A lot of people, I think, did make it to the end of the race on their mediums.
Yes, I think most of the pack did. Mm-hmm. All of that nothing happened for 30 laps, and then we finally get something, which is that Leclerc comes in for the softs.
Mm-hmm. Who's still in third at this point.
Yes, it's definitely worth saying that.
Yeah, and he how far behind Checo is he? He's a couple seconds behind Checo, right?
He's a couple seconds behind, but it seems like Checo has command over second place at this point. Leclerc was not able to get by him, even when at one point Checo makes a pretty bad mistake and like has to drive across the grass, basically. Yeah. And even with that big mistake, losing a bunch of time, Leclerc can't get by him. Mm-hmm. So I guess he did this to get fastest lap. Because there's Lando Norris was behind him. So I guess they think it's sort of a free stop because he's not going to get by Checo.
Yeah, but he's going to, if Lando does overtake him through the pitting, that he'll have the pace to just get right around Lando.
Yes, which is exactly what happens. Mm-hmm.
But very naively on my part, I forgot that another team could make the same move and defend.
Yeah. So now that Leclerc is in third, but actually took a full pit stop, there is naturally a full pit stop's worth of time in between him and Checo.
So Checo comes in.
Easy.
Easy peasy.
normal stop, keeps the position. I don't know if there's too much to say about that other than that.
Yeah.
So that was on lap 51, and that's the same lap that Leclerc passes Lando Norris. I thought that shot looked especially funny with the porpoising. It's like he was bouncing so much and just like bouncing past the McLaren that was not bouncing as much.
Yeah.
It was kind of hilarious.
It looks like a glitch. Like it's a video game and there's some kind of glitch going on.
The porpoising is funny. It's just like the driver is like so helpless in there.
Yeah.
Like the head's going all over the place.
Of these physics.
Yeah. It's just funny. Like it's a funny juxtaposition with this, like powerful driver that's in control of this great machine and they can drive it so fast. And you see them in the straights and they're just like, they can't even see. Their head's all over the place.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then Max comes in because then now he's got a full pit stop to Checo behind him, so might as well. Leclerc mentions that he thinks that they should have gone for the mediums instead of the softs, which surprised me because there was only 11 laps left, and we know they just ran the softs for the 21 laps of the sprint. So I'm not sure exactly what he was thinking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have no thoughts. I mean, the only consideration I could think of is the temperature, getting them up to temperature, but I would think it's easier to get softs up to temp than mediums.
Yeah, I agree. Unless, maybe the car runs better on the mediums. I don't know. I don't really quite understand
Maybe
that.
he just really likes yellow.
Maybe because the yellow is kind of like an accent color for parts of the Ferrari.
Yeah.
And the red is like the primary color. Maybe he wants to be more different. Do like a Lewis Hamilton, like bright neon accents all over the place thing, so he's easy to spot. Because Lewis does that because he's so far back. He wants people to know he's still there. But so then the culmination of all of this is that coincidentally, we're actually riding on board with Charles Leclerc when this happens. But there's a second chicane, not that Tambrinello chicane or whatever that all the passing happens, but there's one later on with these
starts with
big.
An A.
What is that?
It has a name. The next corner you're referring to. I think it starts with an A, but I can't think of it. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Note to self: we should pull up the names of the corners next time we talk about this.
Yeah.
But so this chicane has these big, huge sausage curbs, and I think that the reason why they do that is because, since it's a chicane, you could just make it like a straight line if you cut enough of the two corners. So to make that hard, they put these big, fat, tall curbs there, so you can't actually cut it without like flying up in the air.
Yeah.
And we've seen some interesting results of that because it pops the car up. And this is what we saw last year in Monza when Max landed on top of Lewis. It's the same kind of thing with that sausage curve. It's like a jump.
Yeah. These Italians love their sausage.
Yeah, the other Italian track. That's true.
Yeah.
And so I was noticing, like all week, qualifying and everything, the drivers tended to take a lot of that first curb in the chicane.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Charles Leclerc takes too much.
Big meaty bite of curb.
Yeah,
sausage curb.
Big meaty bite of sausage. And it spins him out and he hits the wall, which is just a pure mistake.
Dude had pace too. When he changed the tires, I thought he was just going to go for the hot lap, get the fastest lap of the race, but he was really closing on Checo. The softs on the Red Bull were not nearly as effective as the softs on the Ferrari.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I can't knock him for being ambitious and going after Checo, but yeah, he really cut that curb.
Yeah. He's been super solid so far this year. But I think this was his first true, just straight up
driver
mistake.
error.
And we've seen him make mistakes in years past that are pretty big. Qualifying in Monaco comes to mind, even though he did actually end up with pole, but he broke the car enough that he couldn't actually race.
Yeah.
But he makes a mistake here, ends up in the wall. He knocks off a part of his front wing. And so they call him into the pits. Like Nico says in the broadcast that maybe they didn't have to do that. Maybe he could have raced with the wing as it was.
Hard decision to make. Are you cutting your losses, or are you taking the risk of trying to hold your position? Super tough.
Yeah. And the reason, just to be clear, the reason why that's a conversation is that there was enough space behind him that after he hit the wall, he was able to get himself back on the track. Lando might have passed him, but no one else, so he would be in fourth.
Yeah.
But as it stands, he did take that pit stop, and he comes out, I don't even know, let's say ninth or something, and he ends up making his way up to sixth place.
In a weird way, credit to Max and credit to Lewis, because my default when I saw him going for the tires was that, like, okay, the risk is in the pit. You know, a wheel's going to get stuck, or I don't know, just something's going to go wrong in the pit with him trying to make this attempt to get the hot lap to save the point. But the reason I'm giving credit to Max and Lewis is because that's the only way we've really seen these things go wrong in the past. We don't see driver error happen after this. But now
that's true.
The team takes this risk, and it falls on Charles' shoulders, and he's the one who screws up.
Yeah, that's a good point. We were spoiled to such an amazing title fight last year, and both drivers were just on it all year, basically. Except for that one turn at the end of Jeddah last year in qualifying at the very end when Max put it in the wall.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing that comes to mind that was just a true, like, straight up driver error.
Yeah. That
whole year, which is incredible. And that's that, really. Max wins easily. Checo comes in second easily. And Lando Norris gets a podium for McLaren, which is very cool.
So quietly. I mean, obviously, it was very clear he was there the whole time. And the announcers mentioned it a couple times, but he was kind of in no man's land, just really having a nice, clean race.
Yeah.
He did not get a lot of camera time today, but wound up in third.
You're right, yeah. And it seems like that's been an effective strategy this year. Another driver that comes to mind that's been doing that is George Russell, who ends in fourth this race.
Very tidy as well, yeah.
With absolutely, like, neither of those two drivers had cars that deserved to be in those positions, to be totally honest.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's been a lot of DNFs with top cars this year, and we're seeing those drivers that can be consistent are still doing pretty well, and I think they're still pretty high in the Drivers' Championship, particularly with Russell, just because he's been in at the end of every single race in a decent position.
Yeah. So I've got three guys I want to give some credit to, but you want to run through the final placings?
Sure. So Verstappen in first and Checo in second, which is the first Red Bull 1-2 since Malaysia 2016, when Daniel Ricciardo won and Max Verstappen came in second, which is kind of a surprising stat. That's a long time ago. I would have thought that they would have had another one. And also Red Bull as a team scored the highest points, the second highest points of all time for this week because of that sprint race.
It's a sprint race, yeah.
They scored 58 points as a team this week, which is huge for them with those DNFs that they had earlier. And actually, speaking of the DNS, this was also the first time this year that all Red Bull-powered cars actually finished the race. But yeah, so real quick, the lineup: Verstappen in first, Perez in second, Lando Norris gets third, George Russell in fourth, Bottas in fifth, was getting into it with Russell at the end there, but couldn't quite get by him.
Yeah.
But still, fifth place for Bottas is awesome.
Yeah, it's huge.
Charles Leclerc in sixth, Yuki Sonoda in seventh. It's a great drive from him. Also kind of not covered all that much, I don't think. But
very quiet race for him, too, as well.
Yeah, but it's very solid, I think. He'll be happy with that one. Sebastian Vettel in eighth place, which is huge for him after the year he's had so far.
Yeah.
And the first points for Aston Martin.
Wow.
Of the year.
Yikes.
Which actually means that now every team has at least 1 point this year. Kevin Magnussen in ninth, Stroll in 10th, which actually double points for Aston, which they've got to be very happy with because that car is not very good this year. Albon in 11th, Gasly in 12th, Lewis Hamilton with a very disappointing 13th place. He came in 10th recently and asked if there were any points for that. In this case, there are not.
Hopefully he knows that.
That's pretty far down. I think he probably knows about that. Needless to say, he's very disappointed. Ocon in 14th, Zhou Guanyu in 15th, Latifi in 16th, actually beat someone on the track this race. Actually, two people on the track, but they both had accidents, so that was why.
Yeah.
So that was Schumacher and Ricciardo in 17th, 18th, and then Alonso and Sainz did not finish. So, who do you want to shout out?
I'll go in order to the winner. Alex Albon again. What a great race.
Yeah, you're right.
Holding off Pierre and Lewis, breathing down his neck the whole time. He just kept putting along. Oh, man.
That's true.
And outdriving the shit in... Okay, we know Nicholas Latifi is not a good driver. We know he's prone to crashing. But he outdrove the shit out of Nicholas Latifi.
Yeah.
And it's just so great to see. Kind of ironically that they're next to each other, but Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon. Pierre, I wouldn't say had a great race, but just to see the story arcs of those two guys where they were driving for Red Bull years ago and crumbling to Max's will, they just look like much more mature, much more like better performing drivers.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great.
Agreed.
Next was Yuki Sonoda. So quiet. Kind of same story like you were saying. Kind of in no man's land for a while. But the way he ate up K-Mag he got 7th, right?
Yeah, I think he also got by Vettel.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't see that one. Crap. But yeah, he ate up K-Mag.
Yeah.
It was just a great race. Ridden, again, another driver who really outdrove his teammate. He really outdrove Pierre today, and we haven't seen that, I don't believe.
You're right. You're totally right.
Yeah. The next one is my favorite. Valtteri Bottas. Oh, I wish he got George. I wanted him to get George so bad towards the end of that race, but George is driving really well. And as we've seen, Valtteri isn't the best wheel-to-wheel racer in the world, and this is a tight track, so didn't have the shot. But also, he got kind of screwed earlier in the race. We didn't really talk about Valtteri's pit stop.
That's true. We didn't. What happened?
What did happen? Just issue with a wheel nut, right? He had trouble with the front right, I believe.
Yep.
In the pits.
I think so.
But he lost a lot of time for that. I want to say 10-ish seconds, maybe.
Yeah.
Which hurts a guy a lot
devastating.
who's fighting for a mid-pack position surrounded by other cars.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I think that's another, just my point about George Russell always being in it. Another, like, he's just racing solidly. He hasn't had issues like that. And it's been working for him, even though his car is worse. Like, that's another example of, you would think Alonso would probably be ahead of George Russell. Sainz would definitely have been ahead. Bottas would have been ahead if not for that issue. Leclerc would have been ahead if not for that issue. It's like we keep saying, like, he's finishing higher than he should be, but like I think it's not necessarily higher than he should be because they're just being consistent, which is worth a lot.
Yeah, it's all fair, right? Like, they are all subject to the same things that can go wrong.
Yep.
So if you beat somebody, you beat somebody,
Yeah, and especially over multiple races, if he's like continually up there just from being consistent, I think that's worth calling out. Similarly, there was on the radio at the end. I don't know. I keep commenting on this Mercedes thing, but I just think it's fascinating. Toto told Lewis, "Sorry for what you had to drive today. I know it was undrivable. This was a terrible race."
Wow.
And like, yeah, wow. And also, it's just so surprising to me. Like, George got 4th place in the same car. Like, how undrivable is it really? I know it's not championship winning, but like, George is up there in 4th, and Lewis is in 13th in the same car. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I just wanted to call it out again.
So there were 2 individuals today who did not make up or lose any positions based on where they started on the grid. And that was Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Everybody else had a ton of movement. There were a lot of people who made up 6 positions. Obviously, 2 people DNFing. They're 2 giveaways. But to see 2 people DNF and Lewis Hamilton not make up a spot. Yikes.
Yeah. I don't think we mentioned this either, but there was lap 41. Max Verstappen lapped Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah. Also a little window into why Jack keeps bringing up Mercedes, because he hates Lewis Hamilton.
Hates is a strong word. But
yes, that's true.
I was rooting for Max last year in the championship.
Yeah,
for sure. And it's just crazy. I don't know. I think the way this has played out so far this year is crazy. Mm-hmm. Also, did you see the cool down room?
No, because I'm a dunce. With how late the sprint race started, I thought the real race would start around the same time. So I didn't catch this stream until 9:45, and the race started at 9. So I started from the beginning, obviously, but I didn't follow the traditional stream essentially. So I did not see the what's it called, the cool down room.
The cool down room. Yeah, I just thought this was awesome. Apparently they've done this in the past before, but it is what it sounds like. After the race, the top 3, they put them in this little room and they played some highlights from the race on the TV, and then they recorded what they were saying. So you could hear for like 2 minutes, Max and Checo and Lando just like casually talked about the race. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was awesome. It was really interesting when they were talking about it.
Do you know if it's back like full time? Like every race will have a cool down room?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that they had it this weekend also in the like minor races on the track.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I hope so. It was really cool.
I know it used to happen. I remember watching it in the past. I just can't believe that it's real, because there's so much like bad blood that that could be brought out in this cool down room. Sometimes the race for first, second, and third is really dicey, and these guys are really unhappy with each other. I can't believe they're just expected to sit in a room with each other after.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, like I used to love when like Kimmy would wind up in there. And Kimmy was the best for the cool down room.
Wow, so much stuff. I do want to read through the driver standings and the constructor standings very quick, but I will try to go very quick because there's a lot of stuff that happened this week. So Leclerc is still in first with 86 points, and Verstappen jumps all the way up to second. He now has 59 points. Checo is now in third with 54, and George Russell is in fourth with 49. Pretty cool.
Wow.
Carlos Sainz is in fifth with 38. Another weekend of no points for... Actually, he got some points in the sprint race. I can't say no points, but few points for him. Lando Norris in sixth with 35. Lewis Hamilton in seventh with 28. Bottas in eighth with 24. Ocon in ninth with 20. Magnussen in 10th with 15. Ricciardo in 11th with 11. Sonoda in 12th with 10. Gasly in 13th with 6. Vettel in 14th with 4. Alonso in 15th with 2. And then Zhou, Albon, and Stroll all have 1. And Schumacher, Hülkenberg, and Latifi all have 0.
Oof, wow. It's crazy how close we are to seeing everyone on the grid with a point. And besides Nicholas Latifi, I think all those guys have a shot to score 1 point. Maybe if 10 people don't finish, Nicholas Latifi has a shot. But other than that, sorry, bro.
And Hülkenberg probably won't get a point. But that doesn't really count.
Yeah, that's true.
Constructors-wise, Ferrari is still in the lead with 124, but Red Bull, with a massive points haul, is now right on their tail with 113. Mercedes in third with 77. Again, interesting because their car is so bad, but they're still in third. They've been a lot more consistent than some other teams. McLaren in fourth with 46. Alfa Romeo in 5th with 25. The Alpines in 6th with 22. AlphaTauri in 7th with 16. Haas in 8th with 15. Aston Martin now has some points, and they are in 9th with 5. And Williams is in last with 1. Haas has not been doing as well as I thought they would after that first race.
Not quite. Mick has not been performing, really. K-Mag, I don't know. Kind of... I think K-Mag's doing how I thought he would do. But I thought Mick would be closer to K-Mag. I think they'd get a couple extra points.
That's true. Yeah. K-Mag has been really doing very well. He's been doing better than I thought he would.
Guy just came out of retirement. And, one of the most storied underperforming teams in history. So, I mean, according to that storyline, they're still doing quite well. But yeah, there are times in the earlier season made it seem like maybe they'd be competing for 3rd or 4th.
Yeah. That's true. Any other thoughts from the race?
It's really more broadly McLaren. I mean, I having seen their earlier races in the season, I thought Mercedes would find 20 extra horsepower or something, and they'd be the team to shake things up. But the strides that McLaren have made are incredible. I'm super happy to see it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not a fluke. Hopefully it's not just the tracks they've been racing. I'd like to see them competitive for the rest of the season.
Yeah. Even if they're competitive for like half the season, it's better than what I was thinking after that first race. I thought that they really ruined it.
Dog shit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good call out. It's true.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, the one other thing I'll just mention really quick because I thought it was interesting. I think the teams are having a really hard time with the weight requirement this year. I know that they started off with a really nice round number, like 750 kilos or something like that. And the teams all petitioned and agreed on raising it by a very specific amount to like 767 or something. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but something very specific because they couldn't quite make it. And some teams are still struggling with weight.
Oh, yeah.
And I think some teams are actually shedding weight by shedding paint.
Yeah.
They're actually to that point. And the Williams this week had a lot less paint on it than in the past. And this is to try to make weight.
Wild. Absolutely wild.
Another Williams thing I wanted to mention, last race, 2 weeks ago, I was talking about how it would have been interesting if Albon had pitted on the very last lap if the pit box was before the start-finish line and then crossed the finish line in the pits to fulfill the requirement of changing tires without having to actually spend all the time in the pit lane.
I remember you saying that last week, and I wasn't following what you meant at all. But now I got you.
Oh, okay. Well, apologies.
I was just like, yeah, I get that, Jack. It makes sense. Now I get it. I'm sorry.
I was so curious about that. And it turns out that Michael Schumacher did that once. And there's now a rule that for a tire compound to count in a race, it has to be driven over the exit line of the pit lane, which is after the start-finish line.
So essentially a full racing lap.
No, you just have to get onto the track.
You would cut off that little section, right? So like the start line might be 50 meters behind the exit of the pit, and that 50 meters would be the part that wouldn't matter. The rest of the lap is what they consider the full lap.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Effectively, it forces you to do a full lap. But the rules are just that you have to drive onto that part of the track.
Yeah.
Which then, that forces you to
you can't finish the race in the pits in this scenario.
Yes. Which in general you could do, but the thing that you can't do is that if you were to finish the race in the pits, if you fitted new tires, those tires don't count towards your requirement of having two different compounds. So I thought that was interesting. Another thing, so we had a listener comment that I also thought was very interesting. We have not seen Lawrence Stroll on the broadcast at all this whole year. Have you noticed that?
Is he normally?
I think last year I saw him all the time.
For some reason, I can't think of seeing him outside of like Drive to Survive. But I'm also really bad at watching the post-race interviews and that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm just over remembering how often I would see him. But I thought that he was there quite a bit. And this year, I can't think of a single time when I've seen him.
Yeah,
He's like pretty famous from that show. So I think the camera would just sort of casually cut to him sometimes when something would happen in Aston Martin land.
Yeah, like we still see a lot of Zach Brown. You know,
Yeah.
they're not only showing the traditional role players, you know, like the team director and drivers. Like Zach is CEO, but they still show a shitload of Zach.
Yeah, he's got a nice beard going right now. Speaking of. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of a surprising point. Part of me wonders if he just doesn't want to be there when they're not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see if we see him some more for the rest of the race. In other news, Alpine have announced that they're willing to loan Oscar Piastri out in 2023, which excites me because I really want to see him in F1.
Yeah, I think that's super exciting as well. I mean, I didn't finish that series, but the reason you know him so well is that F2 series, right?
Yeah, so there's a similar to Drive to Survive series called Chasing the, I don't know, something
Dream?
like that. Dream? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Produced by F1 TV. That's pretty good, and it does F2, and so they follow Piastri a lot. And I also just think that it's frustrating that both Piastri and Zhou Guanyu were racing for the same development program, and Piastri won the season, and Zhou came in second. But yet Zhou got the seat, and Piastri did not.
Yeah. Politics.
Yeah.
Politics.
But Piastri is really, really good, so I'd love to see him next year.
Yeah, I think that's great. I totally agree. Like I said, I didn't finish that series. I watched maybe half of it, but the dude is good. Like, looks like he could be as good as anybody else out there, maybe even better. And to see him get a seat would be super awesome.
Yeah.
But whose will it be? Nicholas Latifi.
It would be
Lewis
cool.
Hamilton.
Him and Albon on Williams would be like the most likable team on the grid.
Yeah, it'd be really funny if that went kind of sour, like how everybody thought Danny Ricciardo and Lando Norris were going to be like best buds, and they really butt heads.
I've heard though that Netflix like way overhyped that
Yeah,
they're not
for sure.
There's not that much animosity.
Yeah.
It just was the Netflix thing. But
Yeah, definitely.
that's about it. The little fun piece of news this week. Apparently, Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams are trying to buy Chelsea, the football team.
Fucking crazy.
I don't know anything else about it, but it's just kind of interesting.
I'd imagine they'd just be part owners. I don't know how soccer teams work.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
The news story specifically said that they were committing millions of pounds to one of the bids vying to become the new owners. So yeah, they just want to be part of that team.
Yeah. But still, you can make a lot of money in this world doing some pretty cool stuff, and neither of us do that.
This is cool.
Yeah, this probably costs us money.
So far.
Hit the Patreon that we don't have.
But you can hit us at our email, thevroom.pod@gmail.com. We're also, this podcast is out there on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So you can watch or listen to us in any place that's convenient, really. And you can find all that stuff on our website at vroom.show.
Hell yeah.
So that's about it. The next race, I believe, is in 2 weeks in Miami. So that'll be the next time that we talk. Nick, what'd you learn this week?
Can you go first? I can't think of anything. I've been like in the back of my mind this whole time. I've been trying to think of something. I got nothing.
Well, I'm going to say it again now
I
for
have
like
something.
the 5th time. I'm just going to go because I started.
Yeah, go.
I learned that the Mercedes is truly a bad car this year. I think that I was still kind of holding out that they might fix it really quick.
Yeah.
And then even after the first couple races, there were the first two were like right in a row. So I was like, okay, they don't really have time to get their fixes in. But now we've had a few races, and there's been weeks in between, and the car still looks as bad as ever. So that's what I learned.
I'm going to edit yours because this week you learned that real G's move in silence like lasagna. Because the G is silent in lasagna, as well as Emilia Romagna. And I learned this week that if you need to stay awake, you shouldn't pee.
And on that note,
See you guys.